I'm Tom Arbogast.
And you've been involved in WNPJ since almost the beginning, right?
I've been involved since the beginning. I was at the initial organizational meeting that night 20 years ago in the state capitol's the assembly room. And it was a very exciting evening to me, and I thought that the people there, the group, pretty large, were pretty turned on and excited about organizing in some way to stand up for peace and justice. And as I remember, we had just started, I think, bombing Iraq. But one of my memories was standing up in the balcony at one point, observing the crowd on the floor and thinking how fortunate we were not to be being bombed like we were doing to Iraq at that time. And here we were, safe, hopefully, in Madison. But I was quite interested in getting more involved in it. And I got to know Bob Kimbrough at that time, and he and I got to talking about working on the organization more. And a year or two later, he and I co-chaired one of the spring meetings, I think, that was held at the Wisconsin Union. And that was a very interesting event, I thought. But then I personally joined the group, and then I'm trying to remember now, around that time, some of us here in Sauk Prairie, where we're meeting today, met and formed the Sauk Prairie Area Peace Council, which continued to meet and be a member as a group of the network, well, for 20 years plus. And we had a 20th anniversary back in '04. Yeah, so we started, our first meeting was in '84. Well, anyhow, I just think that the network has been successful because, as Barb said, much due to the environment that we live in, where there are many peace activists and concerned and educated people in the Madison and Wisconsin area, people who really cared about those issues a lot. And I think a lot had to do with the leadership we had. And Steve Bronigan was very much involved then and was quite active as a leader. And then I'm not remembering who else exactly, but...
Any memories of Nan Cheney?
Well, yeah, Nan Cheney, of course, was involved initially. And, our dear legislator lady,
Midge Miller.
Unfortunately, they've passed on, but they did great contributions. And of course, Bonnie Block came in very strongly in there. And then the I'm blanking.
Okay.
Well, he became the president of the board,
Okay.
and later went to Washington. But when Judy came in as the executive secretary, she was the firebrand person who really kept things going and still does. After I was on the board for a little while, I think I was treasurer for a while, but then I couldn't continue at the time. So I'm happy to be involved in this meeting and celebration today.
You're talking about organizing in Sauk City, we'll start with you, Tom. One of the things that Susan Enslow, this is another leader that we interviewed recently, mentioned is that sometimes organizations fall into what she calls the M&M syndrome. Everybody's from Madison and Milwaukee. It's not really a genuinely statewide organization. But do you think that WNPJ transcends that, and why is it important to somebody in a small town or a rural area, that it be genuinely statewide?
Well, Tom Sullivan, a local physician, and I got a number of people around here to meet, including the famous maverick politician Bill Hart, and Nate Sadowski and Fred Daher, and we had our formation night there in February of '84, and we called ourselves the Sauk Prairie Area Peace Council, and we had co-chair people for many years, and we kept meeting monthly, and we're fortunate to get a lot of good speakers from the university and from the Madison Peace community, and we kept going. And then about 2 years ago, I had to kind of drop out from it, but because of some health reasons, and I moved from this area, and now that group is kind of somewhat dormant. But John Nichols used to speak to us often,
Sure.
and he would give us a lot of credit for being a small group, a small town group, and things that we were doing. We had Matt Rothschild and, of course, Sam Day, and had some wonderful programs.
Is it harder to speak out in a small town where everybody knows you?
Well, on a couple of occasions, we did run into some resistance. I'm trying to remember when it was, but we wanted to have a kind of a march or a parade, and some people were upset about that, and developed a Contra group. I think it was on a Veterans Day, but for the most part, we would carry on anyhow. And I used to write a lot of letters to the editor, and got some negative feedback often, but it was an interesting experience. Frank was quite an instigator initially, excuse me, in conjunction with Dan, and that gave us a good start, especially there in the Capitol. But I think the concept of our organization being a network of various small groups throughout the state was the key to the continuance of it. And that was always emphasized, that the organization was a network, not a group, independent, so to speak, based in. It was a network of many groups, and there were a lot of groups throughout the state that participated through the years, plus many individuals.
I heard you use the phrase early on, peace and justice. But from what I hear, there was a conscious decision to add justice, so that it was broader than the way sometimes people normally box in the concept of what a peace movement is about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I forget initially who kind of put forward that concept, but we did want to emphasize peace and justice, specifically social justice. And I remember Steve Ronigan was quite a good leader for us initially. So we've been fortunate. Well, my background professionally was as a social worker and psychotherapist, and that in itself gave me experience and concepts in peacemaking in different ways in my social work career. And I guess that I had become increasingly concerned about the arms race then, which helped us here locally to organize the Salt Prairie Peace Council. And we thought we had to do something to at least educate the local area more. And we took in people from Lodi and Baraboo, and we grew in strength and numbers, I think. But one of the things I think that was a very helpful tool in our group was our website. I remember being at a meeting in New York City at the United Nations regarding the nuclear proliferation issues. And I met a gentleman from California who was very impressed with our network, with our website then. And I think the people who handled that, well, I know Judy was a part of it, and I forget who else. Of course, Steve Burns came in there. But we've been and then Steve, if I could only remember Steve's last, well, he was very concerned about the growing nuclear movement.
You're not talking about Alfred Meyer, right?
Oh, yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, Alfred Meyer,
Okay.
not Steve. Yeah, and of course, Alfred went on to Washington,
Yep.
is working with some national group regarding the spread of the nuclear power industry. So we were blessed with a lot of good people.
As a case in point, actually, we talked to Alfred, and one of the questions we asked him is, what is there about WNPJ that Alfred could not only talk about non-proliferation issues, which of course are directly related to anti-war movement, but he brought in the full spectrum of the dangers of nuclear power and how it relates and other things.
Yes.
Any thoughts on why it's been important to not just focus narrowly, but to see the bigger picture like that?
Well, I think that was a very important point, to see the bigger picture of the dangers of nuclear power as well as nuclear weapons. And he was very articulate about emphasizing those connections. And I remember too, Sam Day often spoke to different programs and groups. And of course, Sam was very much involved in the anti-nuclear movement and a great advocate of peace, and one who really walked his talk, having gone to prison different times. In fact, he got me involved in my first protest and arrest. And I had the privilege of crossing the line with him out at the Offutt Air Force Base near Omaha. And he was like a mentor to me. And of course, initially, Cassandra Dixon was one of the leaders then, and the group, I forget their name now, the Nuke Watch. She and Sam were the leaders in that, and Bonnie Ufer. So I think I talked to somebody from other states that were quite impressed with what Wisconsin was doing.
But as you're talking about civil disobedience and learning from other folks who had done that kind of work before, could you expand on that? What are the advantages of WNPJ as a network in which we can learn from each other, both folks with lots of experience, but perhaps we can also learn from folks on the other end of the spectrum who are youth, who have fresh new ideas? Is that something you see on both ends?
Well, I think so. I know that I felt comfortable, quote unquote, to become more of an activist through others in the network, including Sam. And in fact, a number of us went out to the Nevada test site at the time of the millennium and crossed the line out there. And in fact, the man who played the president on TV,
Martin Sheen?
Yeah,
I think Martin Sheen.
Yeah, Sheen? Yeah, Martin Sheen, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he was in that group that night and was talking about some of the episodes.
Have you learned some things in terms of seeing and being inspired by some of the younger people involved as well?
Well, yes, our Peace Council here in Salt Prairie used to have programs presented in some of the classrooms, and we ended up giving scholarships to some of the youth leaders here in a developing junior, quote-unquote, Peace Council. And some of those early winners, well, we were part of a essay contest, which Vince Kavalowski co-chaired, and a number of these winners of the local essays went to New York and United Nations and Washington, and a number of those young people later told us that that was a life-changing experience for them. So we always thought that involving young people in our group in some way was very important. I often wanted to see us be more of a, quote, lobbyist group or a pressure group on the state legislature and governorship about what we were doing, and more broadly on Congress and the presidency. And that was quite a challenge as to how to do that. But I think one of the tools could be yet utilized more in joining up with other states. For instance, I'm not sure about Minnesota, but they may have something like this. But to spread out access to our website and our newsletter, which have a lot of good information about what's going on here in Wisconsin. If you look at that website, the people who handle that give information about all the weekly rallies or protests throughout the state, and it's rather mind-boggling to see how many local groups are doing rallies or protests and other kinds of actions for the cause. So I hope we can broaden that too, as Barbara was saying.
I'm impressed by the fact that this is pretty unusual that you have this many groups, that is this much issue, that it's genuinely statewide, that it's lasted for this long. Is that something that might be replicated? That might be a good mission for the group too going forward?
Well, I would think it could be. It could mean a lot more work and involvement.
Yeah.
But I would think that our sister city, Minnesota, could well develop, or we could maybe help them develop something like our model, and even Illinois and Indiana, maybe Michigan. So that's going to take people who really want to commit themselves to help that.
Yeah.
And I hope that we can do that someday.
Do you have any last thoughts? Or?
No, I'm just pleased to be here talking about this.
Well, we sure
Thank you.
appreciate